Hello again, whiskey friends. Thanks for joining everybody for the main event of the year. Been diligently reviewing almost 100 whiskeys over the course of 2024. It is time to talk about the top 10. So, some of the brands that you're going to see here, you may not be familiar with, but I would recommend you keep a lot of these brands on your radar. I suspect a lot of the brands on this list are just going to get better as time goes on. And as I can, I will comment on how you can get these bottles yourself because a lot of these can still be had, particularly from some online retailers, but something to keep an eye out for locally as well, depending on how your area rolls. So thank you for joining today, whiskey friends. Let's kick off the show. Man, actually got my number one whiskey in the glass here. We'll go through a little tasting later, but that nose was absolutely delicious. So what we are going to do today is do essentially a recap of the year, mainly focused on my top 10 bourbons and ryes and whiskeys in general throughout the year, but also what are the general themes and the things that were learned throughout the year as well within this hobby and maybe some trends that we'll see continue into 2025. Now, when it comes to what we do here on the channel, we do diligently review all the whiskeys that we come across. Me, myself, I happen to review close to 100. Now, what that means is behind the scenes, I got a Google form and I will log all the stats about every whiskey that I either crack or get a sample of and have all of these metrics, a total of 10 metrics behind the scenes, grade those on a scale of 0 to 10. We'll get to that scoring system here in just a moment. But the criteria to be on this particular list when it comes to the bottles I'm going to highlight as my top 10, first off, have to own the bottle. It has to be in the house, in my basement, at the moment of recording. No samples can be involved. Also, I had to purchase the bottle with my own money. Media samples don't count either. So from time to time, we do get gifted bottles to do reviews on. But if I'm going to put that in my top 10, I've got to double down and buy it with my own money. I can't just rely on the media sample to put it here. Also, our own picks don't count. We did come out with some delicious picks, some of which would have made this list had I opened it up for that. But man, that seems pretty self-serving. So I'm just going to promote us through these couple of sentences. But we did come out with some great picks in 2024, and we've got a lot more on the way in 2025. So join up for our Patreon if you're interested in that. And single barrels are valid to me. I know some people like to leave single barrels off the list. They like to say, oh, not enough people can get their hands on a single barrel. Those same people sometimes will then put a release that only has 800 bottles or 1,000 bottles. I really don't see the difference. And quite frankly, I would rather promote to you the brands that are putting out great single barrels at the moment so that you can hunt those at stores or in your local groups and keep an eye out for those brands. Where if it is some limited release that has 1,000 bottles, it's a one and done. You don't even have the chance to find something later down the line that may fit the profile I'm talking about. So single barrels are on this list. Now, we'll get to some honorable mentions. I talked about that scoring system before. It is really hard to score an 86 or higher in our scoring system. That essentially means the whiskey has to be earning a lot of nines. The easiest way to get to an 86 is essentially having 6 of the metrics be a 9 and only 4 of the metrics being an 8. That is hard. Maybe you get some 10s and get some wiggle room in that, but scoring 9s is not something that I do lightly. But here are some honorable mentions that were just outside the top 10. A lot of Nashville single barrels that were absolutely delicious. Shout out to Barrels for Hope and ADHD Whiskey. I liked your single barrels in particular this year. K. Luke Batch 8. We'll come back to K. Luke. Bardstown Discovery number 12. Loved that one. And then the OKI 11-year rye. It was the year of rye. So we'll be talking about ryes later in the list. Cigar, our Copper Cast Cigar Blend. Now, this is one that still might be in your area. Very sneaky bottle, especially for $70. right outside the list. But man, if you see that one, I would grab it. I haven't done the whole review on that one yet, but you can already kind of see where it's scoring. Elijah Craig C924. I know I'm like maybe in a minority there, or maybe it's like half and half at this point. That is a really love or hate bottle, and one of the only examples of a heritage distillery on this list this year. Obtanium. Man, check out what Gene is doing over there on Cat's Eye. There were some amazing Obtanium single barrels that were essentially 11-year MGP bourbons at a very affordable price, released throughout the year. If you were in the know on those, you got spoiled. I got my hands on a couple different single barrels, thanks to Cheech over at Whiskey Encore. Bourbon hooked me up with one from Elixir, and then also the whiskeychannel.com and Trev, the Bourbon Wrench, had some on their site that Gene hooked them up with as well. So, those were some good bourbons. And shout out to whiskey.com and Trev again, right outside my top 10, but the bottle that held on for quite a while, their Bull Run 16-year light whiskey that was finished in Pinot. Amazing. And I always recommend, if you have the chance to get some of those 15, 16-year light whiskeys, especially at an affordable price. In this particular case, this one only cost $47. Wow. Light whiskey can be so, so good, especially when it's finished in Pinot and some other wine casks. So let's get into the top 10. First off, we have K. Luke again. K. Luke Bourbon Batch 10. I actually didn't think K. Luke was going to be on my list. Now, this one I got from the Party Source. If you're in Northern Kentucky, I know these are still on the shelves there. There are a lot of other examples where I see pictures of these on the shelf when it comes to Batch 10. So you could pick this up maybe today if K. Luke is in your area. Also, look for this one online, retailers like Sealbox. Now, this one would run $115, so this is a pricey bottle, but an absolutely delicious blend of Indiana and Kentucky bourbons. Do plan to do a full review on that one too before the year's up. Another one that really sticks out and defines my year, got to go on a pick with Jason over at the Mash and Journey, Jason and Scott, but the barrel that we picked isn't my favorite, though, amongst all of the Middle West Pumpernickel Rye single barrels I got my hands on. Shout out to Barrels for Hope as well. But this one comes from a local Columbus group called Two Bros, One Bottle. And this one was something special to me. The effervescence on this one that I get mid-palate really distinguishes it from some other Pumpernickel Ryes that I've gotten my hands on. But in general, this should be a brand that is on your radar, because this stuff is only going to get better as it gets more and more age behind it. And Middle West is doing a lot of pumping out some good whiskeys up in Columbus, Ohio, even like contract distilling and sourcing for people. It's crazy how much they got going on up there. So keep Middle West on your radar. And if you do see a pick of the Pumpernickel Rye, that is one to consider. One of my favorite whiskeys right now. Another one, once again, Columbus, Ohio representing. Now, this is going to be a blend of Indiana bourbons and Indiana ryes. Now, it's very rye leaning in that blend, at least from what I can tell based on the flavor profile I get. But this is the Double Double from Whiskey War from High Bank. So the Double Double part of it, they take that blend and then they finish it in New Oak, and then they finish it in New Oak again, thus the Double Double. Now, this is going to come out every year, and you're going to get to see the blend that they come out in the batches, but they've also been coming out with single barrels lately, one of which just came out from the Mash and Journey. I got to be on that pick on that same day as we did the Middle West. Absolutely delicious. I would equate getting a single barrel of Whiskey War Double Double kind of like getting a single barrel or a store pick of Woodford Reserve Double Oak, where it's not necessarily a pure single barrel per se, but it is something that was finished all together. You know, that blend was created, put in that barrel, and then you can get some different flavor profiles on that. So if you're into Woodford Double Oak, you probably understand what I'm talking about with store picks. You can see that kind of same variation then when it comes to these Whiskey War Double Double single barrels. The next one on the list. This brand just keeps popping up for us. This was one of my favorite whiskeys in 2023, particularly a single barrel that Durrell was part of for a local store from him. Durrell is really the one that put this one on our radar and continues to. This is actually local to Durrell, so he's gotten to spend some time over there. The one that Durrell raved about was this 9-year small batch. And wow, did this one blow me away? Darrell sent me a sample of it. And probably within 2 minutes, I was like, yeah, need a bottle of that. And now you see why. Scoring all the way at an 88 for a 9-year small batch of Indiana bourbon. Quite the blend. And I already highlighted that cigar blend earlier. So keep an eye out for Copper and Cask. We're going to keep hyping them, hoping to do a pick with them too in the near future here. Next on the list is going to be OKI 11 year. Now, this is my favorite of the 11 years I got my hands on this year. This one is a pick from Party Source, $130. I talked about the Obtainiums earlier. I think they got some of the same family of barrels that Gene over there at Cat's Eye got as well, or at least they taste very similar. Now, while this one is my personal preference, I know others that like some of those Obtainium barrels even better. And frankly, with the price being at 85 versus 130, hard to go wrong with Obtainium. But love giving a shout out here to OKI, a brand that is near and dear to my heart just based on their roots in general. Also, with the Roebling Bridge here in Cincinnati, I get to walk across this thing and get this view right here, sometimes on my lunch break during the summer. Next on the list, the most expensive bottle on the list, this is going to be the Foregate. Now, this is the Kelvin collaboration here. And what makes this one so unique is, first off, a blend of 3 different mash bills of Kentucky bourbons, all 9 years old, that were then finished in Madeira and dark rum casks. Some of the best Madeira finished whiskey I have had in a few years. I know Foregate hadn't done a Madeira finish yet because they were waiting to get their hands on casks they felt were good enough. They finally pulled the trigger here, and wow, another Kelvin collaboration that blew my socks off. This is one of the releases every year that I continue to buy when so many other releases, things like Master's Keep, I've given up on. I keep buying these Kelvin collaborations. One of my most anticipated releases each and every year, and this one fit the billing as well. Wow, now we're getting into the top 4. This one is very surprising to me here, and one to keep an eye on yet again. I bet you a lot of people that are watching this have seen this label, have seen Ben Holiday, and these single barrels are getting better and better. This is a brand that has been on my radar, gosh, for what, 2 years now, 3 years now? This single barrel in particular, when it comes to a cast strength, soft red wheat, absolutely loved it. This one was chosen by the Mash and Journey Whiskey Club. Kelsey was technically in on this pick. This one comes in at 7 years old and 123 proof from Missouri. Missouri whiskey in the top 10 on my list. Love it here. We'll go through that a little later, but we are representing a whole lot of states on this list. But do recommend again, while you may not get your hands on this particular single barrel, just know how high some of these can bat. Maybe it's worth taking a chance on one of these at your local store, implying that you do trust their palates. Now getting into the top 3. In the top 3, one of my favorite brands recently. I mean, I just love this brand and everything about them. We're getting into the Hard Truth. Now, this is the 2024 Masters Distiller blend, particularly. Now, Masters Distiller's Reserved Sweet Mash Rye. What makes this one so unique is it's a blend of all of their more unique mash bills as well. They have a caramel malt rye, they have a chocolate malt rye, and they have a malted rye. And they took those 3 releases and they blended them together in different proportions to make this special whiskey right here. Really, really excited about this one. I loved the caramel malt, rye, but it always lacked a certain complexity to me. They found that complexity by blending in that chocolate malt and the malted rye. Oh my gosh, I don't know if I can drink the three components now without blending them. They work so well together. So, shout out to Hard Truth for putting out another great release. Next on the list, and this is going to be the highest ranking rye on the list, though two of the three are ryes. Oh, shoot, even the number one. Well, we'll talk about that later. So this one is Traverse City Rye. Now, this is a close to a 11-year single barrel rye sourced from Indiana. A lot of 11-year rye hit the market. I've actually got an OKI 11-year rye right above my head, somewhere over here. There were other brands as well. The one that Durrell went crazy for was from a New England barrel company, Nebco. A lot of other people got their hands on River Roots. Point being, there were a lot of barrels that hit the market, and 11-year ryes and older ryes were one of those barrels that somebody just released out there, probably to help with cash flow or just decided it was time to divest. Either way, regardless of the context, we're the ones that benefit. As long as you're keeping track of the brands that have those special whiskeys, and then you can get your hands on special ryes like this one. Now, keep an eye out for OKI, River Roots, a bunch of those other brands that I shouted out as well, because they had some amazing single barrels in general. If you see an 11-year Indiana and it's on a good price, this one was 120. That's a good spot to pull the trigger there. I've seen them as low as 90. Now we're getting into my top whiskey of the year. The one that is in the glass right here that, man, I am parched after all that talking. Finally get to take a sip of it. We are getting into actually a rather divisive one for being my number one, strangely enough. But the Bardstown Amroot. So this ended up being more divisive than I would have expected as we went across the year. I think some of it comes from the fact that it was finished in American single malt. It's also a bourbon rye blend. So if you aren't familiar with this one, essentially 60% of the whiskey is a blend of 95.5 Indiana rye and 51% Indiana rye, creating a blend similar to the things that Sagamore does, as an example. Now, they took that 60% and finished it in Amroot single malt, and then afterwards, then blended in the bourbons, some of which is 14-year that looks like wild turkey on the mash bill. So let's get a sip of this thing because I need it. I need to take a breath here. Cheers, everybody. If you're here all the way till now, I appreciate you sticking with me. So the one thing that gets me here, and I'm always surprised, some of the people that are into turkey aren't more into this one. Man, it's the cherry comes through from the bourbon, but at the same time, I'm getting the citrus from the rye. I'm getting that single malt as well, and they all blend together so well on the nose. Let's get into the finish here. Yeah. One of the best finishes of the year for me. From mid palate to the finish, I think that's where this thing really blooms. I can sit here and pick this thing apart. I can feel all the different components that are in there. And the one thing that's even like permeating right now, particularly on the sides of my tongue, is the oak from some of the older whiskeys in there. At the same time that the rye is dancing on the tip of my tongue and the single malt is finishing in the back of the palate. Like they're all doing different things simultaneously. I love the symphony of this particular pour. Now, I know a lot of people aren't going to dissect things in the way that I am right here. Some people just want to drink the whiskey. This one might not be one for you if you're just looking to pound it. But if you're somebody that wants to sit down and dissect something for, gosh, half hour I've probably spent with this pour from time to time. Oh my gosh, what a beautiful, beautiful whiskey. And I would say one of the most surprising whiskeys of the year, something that wasn't on my radar whatsoever. But as you can see on the score, I had a hard time finding a fault in it. So cheers, everybody. Oh my gosh, that's so delicious. All I got was like the old turkey on that sip. So that is the top 10 of 2024. Now, what this all leads to for us at Hello Again Whiskey Friends is coming up on a live in just a few weeks at the beginning of January. We are going to do a draft because while this is my top 10 of the year, Kelsey maintains his own list. Darrell maintains his own as well. So what we're going to do is do a NFL style draft, and we are going to nominate the bottles that we want to have in our blind tournament to officially crown the favorite for the channel, which we will work on over the course of probably about February. It takes a little while to get all those things put together. So if you're interested in that, be sure to hit the subscribe, follow us on our journey as we crown our collective favorite of 2024 through a rigorous blind tournament here. And we'll have a whole bunch of whiskey friends and guests to help us through that process. So let me know in the list, which of these have you had? Which of these do you love? Which of these are you surprised by? Which of these are you surprised aren't on the list? If you have something on your own list, put those in the comments, spread the word, and show some people other things that they could fall in love with. So thank you for joining today, whiskey friends. We'll catch you on the next one. Goodbye, everybody.